Yeah, so if I can share my screen, I hope everyone can see the screen, and I don't want to really call it a presentation. It's really sharing more of my experiences and my ideas and my adventures that I've had in the last 12 years, where I was very fortunate and being exposed to all these adventures within nature. So if I can start off with the presentation, obviously you can see that it's not just me that's been involved with this. Even though I'm based at the University of the Free State and my colleagues, I've got multiple friends and colleagues from all over the country that I'm involved with and that can assist or at any stage help me when there's some field work or any analysis that needs to be done. So if I continue on the presentation, maybe you can follow there with me. That if you look at that, for instance, you'll realize that scientists, we think different. And I think that's the idea of us to be thinking outside the box. And we don't know all the answers. And if you look at that motivation to motivate your answer, someone just said, go, answer, go. And I mean, that's ideal. If you think about it, it's not up to us to come up with perfect conclusions and answers. Eventually, I can honestly say we sit with more questions than answers after 12 years of research. And then why science teachers should not be given playground duty, I think it's because we think different. And we need to think different. And that's what makes it very nice, in my opinion, to be exploring some sort of curiosity that comes with it. Just a little about myself. My wife is Cornelia. She's an occupational therapist, a big passion for autistic and disabled children. She's doing some skills training at the school, disabled school. And then my oldest daughter is going for 6.5 years, and then the middle one is 5.5 years, and then the youngest is going for 3. So as part of a family and other responsibilities, I wish I could spend more time in the field, but I need to be a family member as well. And then when you travel in Africa, like many of you, you always travel with the camera. So there's opportunities around each corner to capture something and to share that with anyone that's got an interest. I mean, Africa is an absolute jewel. I've been fortunate to be traveling quite a bit with the research and my work. And it makes it unique. Each country with its own potential and limitations. I've been fortunate to be traveling to, I think, 15, 16 African countries and many other places in the world because of the research and the doors that it opened for me. So all these pictures are my own, and it's nice to be sharing that as well for those of you who like to see a nice picture. Most of it is from arid areas like the Giraffes. Yeah, and then if I had my my number one time spending, it would be to be in the Kalahari, sitting underneath a camel thorn tree, either doing it on my own, like most of my field work, or to involve students or some of my colleagues, like in the more recent years. But when I did my PhD, it was many weeks in the field and spending time with the animals and gathering the data. Not just the giraffe that's keeping me busy, but with the teaching at the university and the lecturing and the research that comes with it is multiple large herbivores. And you've probably heard by now that my research focus is on the habitat more than just the animal. And we've managed to put up mobile labs at a few places and within a few reserves as well, where we can do some of the analysis in the field as well. Obviously, there's some sort of training that comes with it, and my students, if it's a bush camp or if it's hands-on training or translocation, you always want to expose the students to that as well. And then recently with the Indonesians that we've become very acquainted with and some good friends we've made over the years, the rhinos in Indonesia equally as the African rhinos and some of the African wildlife species are facing the same issues and same concerns. So if I get invited again for a follow-up talk, I'll probably want to share some of our experiences we had in Gunung Leeuser and Waikambas, Ujung Kulon, the things we did in Indonesia, and also when we invited them to come and join on some of the rhino expeditions we did in South Africa as well. Yeah, then if I really want to share everything, it's impossible to name everyone that's involved with the research we're doing. Made various friends and colleagues over the years. Globally, I'm connected with friends that really feel the same passion and share the same interest, and it's got the same curiosity. So these pictures are just sharing some of the fun we've had in the field. So whenever there's an international expedition coming this way and we're launching something or we're doing some field work, in between the captures or the translocations, we'll have fun. In this instance, each one had to get a kudu dung sample, and based on the distance that you can spit that kudu sample, it determines the vehicle that you'll be traveling in. So it's more or less like a hierarchy that you can almost set out, but those who know and familiar with it would have a good laugh for the moments we had there. And then I've put this, it's obviously coming from a Google image or a diagram, but scientists need to differ in many ways, and scientists really need to think different, but we should have the same goal. And as conservationists and being native to Africa, it's important that we've got multiple and various obstacles trying to achieve our goal. So if you are blindfolded, or if you come from a different angle, or you've got different sort of training, the backgrounds differ, but eventually I want to be in a position where, like Gus Mill said, if you are 35, 40 years down the line and you've dedicated your life towards something and you made a difference eventually after your career, I want to see a bit more clear picture for the giraffe, and I want to have a few pieces in that puzzle that contributed to our understanding in saving the giraffe, and yeah, doing my absolute best and sharing that also with my students. That same sort of education that comes with it, and the conservation efforts that we've put in not just South Africa, but in Africa as well. That makes the difference. So if I could quickly share a quick video. I think if I exit my PowerPoint, I think that'll be best, where I quickly maybe share this, and then the credit goes to Ashley Davison, who's my friend from Texas.
There's a wonder in the grandeur about the Rockies. There's a wonder in the grandeur about the Empire State Building. But when you can see these magnificent animals in the wild, it's beautiful to see a giraffe.
I've always taken giraffes for granted, like everybody else, but I've always loved giraffes. They have an enormous impact on keeping that landscape vibrant and diverse.
Listen, there's something going on in Africa.
The giraffe species are going through some serious challenges.
It's unbelievable that an animal can be so few in number and yet nobody really knows about it.
An 80% decline is mammoth.
Kind of sleepwalking into losing them. It's a quiet crisis.
Within a couple of years, we won't see that species anymore.
The destruction of animals on the planet is no different than ripping apart a Rembrandt or a Van Gogh. That's a complete loss. They're slowly disappearing and people aren't aware of it.
If we don't do something about them, we're going to lose them.
We need knowledge to eventually turn this thing around, if we can.
It can't just be one or two people that help save a species. It takes more than that.
Then she will stand up again.
We need to look after nature, and if we can't figure that out, we don't deserve to be here.
So after watching the video, you can see the seriousness of we're definitely at a race for trying to understand the complicalities that comes with saving the giraffe. And like I said earlier, it's not that I want to focus on the negative side for giraffe and what's the issues that we're facing. It's more that what's the positive things we're doing and the research we're focusing on, and where we get people involved with the efforts we've put in. So you've probably seen multiple images like this on the internet, and it's disturbing to see that. But giraffe is facing extinction the same way as any African mammal or wildlife species, because they lose their habitat. It's habitat destruction. It's the human population and the increase, and we can't keep up with it. The animals can't keep up with it. And if you look at this, for instance, is areas where giraffe freely roamed once upon a time. Now we've got small pockets that we're still trying to protect, and it's a human error. If you look at this, it speaks so many words, because it tells us the resources are becoming limited, and these animals, it's not their fault, and they've been put in a position to fight for what's left. And if you think about the bigger picture for the continent and what you've read in the media and IUCN statements, and I mean, we've suddenly realized that giraffe is facing the same issues as we've got with the rhinos and lions and other predators throughout the continent. And the question is, who's doing anything about it? Who's doing something to try and turn that around? And I can name you less than 5 people that are boots on the ground, really doing hard miles to try and turn it around. If we look at this, I'll probably hope it plays well, but
groundbreaking research is to be undertaken at the University of the Free State, South Africa, by wildlife researchers Francois Deacon and Nico Smith in the Kalahari region bordering Namibia and Botswana. Since little research on giraffes in arid regions is known, this project will investigate the giraffe population in the arid Kalahari region to foster decision-making that will benefit nature conservation, like relocation of animals and human tourism alike in a holistic manner. The total number of giraffes in Africa was estimated by IUCN in 1999 to exceed 140,000, of which 40% were in or around protected areas and private lands, and such numbers were thought capable of being maintained where they are adequately protected. Current estimates by the GCF have the population at less than 80,000 individuals across all subspecies. This is a considerable drop in the last decade and shows that the plight of giraffe is in real danger. This is the first project ever to design and manage GPS collars for giraffe through satellite tracking, and 8 giraffe have already been equipped with these specially designed collars. Data will be gathered on home ranges, seasonal movements, human or giraffe interaction zones, migration routes, and duration of migration in a very cost-effective way.
If I look back and see what we tried 10, 12 years ago, and when I was still working for Sand Parks in the Kalahari Transfrontier Park, if I realized back then how serious and how much I'll get involved with giraffe conservation and efforts, I probably would have or changed a little career. It's difficult to share the emotions that comes when I watch the videos and where it comes from. This picture, for instance, African parks flown me over to Garamba National Park to go and assist there on a conservation effort on the last few remaining giraffe, sharing some ideas and knowledge with the habitat with the rangers. And I realized that it's the problem is probably too big to tackle as an individual. So the quicker I need to get people involved and get expert skills in, and the best is in the business, the better. So my PhD evolved really, and the research that I'm busy with now on the giraffe really started off with, what do we understand about the habitat? What do we know about the habitat these animals thrive in? What's the minimum requirements for them to keep them safe and not to put them under nutritional stress or anything related to that? So with my background and training, I realized that we've probably zoomed in a little too much on the animal and we forgot about what's going on around. And once you've lost that tree for a giraffe, you've lost a resource, a critical resource that you probably can never replace in the giraffe's lifetime, and not even to speak about my lifetime. So I've got the saying, people might differ a lot with me, but if we can save the habitat, I think the animals will be fine. But the problem is we can't do that. So I've started to initiate projects and realized that if we can learn from the animal, and the animal tells us what they want, what they avoid, areas they favor, areas they avoid, what are the qualities in those areas that they favor? How can we conceptualize that habitat into not just a scientific publication, but the actual implementation for conservation and management? So looking at a tree, looking at an animal, which ones will give us answers? And it's both. And we need to stand back as humans, and we really need to look at the animal and see how can we take it from there. So multiple ideas, multiple meetings I've had over many years, many different countries, but one of the biggest obstacles was to come up with a design for GPS collars and to develop that and to understand what are we going to do with the data, not just to collect the data, but to implement the information we get from it. The resources, how do we understand and evaluate and quantify the resources? And then obviously everything we're doing needs to go through an ethical and an approval phase. And we need to get multiple permits and paperwork and MOUs and approvals from not just my own university, but from nature conservation and from sand parks and Department of Agriculture and Forestry and Fisheries, and I mean, you can name it, agriculture, MOUs with the different reserves and the stakeholders. So that is probably the paperwork that goes into one project. So everything we're doing is ethical. It gets censored. We need to give feedback. There's actually people going along to supervise what we're doing, if it's ethical, if it's clinical. The well-being of the animal always first. So paperwork is a big thing. The ethical thing is a big thing. And I like that idea of it because it keeps you accountable. And I think maybe there's some people that get away with not being accountable. And then before we even started collaring giraffe, we had a 2-year like trials and experiments and designs and different ways of trying to come up with something that might work, not just for a couple of weeks, but can last for years. So the best guy I went to, and we've become very good friends over the years, is Martin Help from Africa Wildlife Tracking. I think it's someone that also need to give a talk on unlocking nature with his experience and the people that he's worked with. It's absolute pleasure to be working with Martin and Sophie and Hadrian and his company. And they accompanied us on all the collaring expeditions. It makes it 10 times more fun and more accurate to have the right people assisting us during that. But the different designs, we've had head collars, we've had neck collars, we've had leg collars, we've got ear tags. Eventually we had to test each of them on various individuals, some tame individuals, some trained individuals. We had the ear tags that didn't last too long. I think the longest was 6 months. Yeah, there's some individuals in Sandveld Nature Reserve where we used it. It worked very well, and the data that we got from it. But yeah, eventually it just didn't do the trick for the 2 years. Back to the drawing board, coming with new designs, changing it every time, and eventually we ended up with a nice design that we feel comfortable with. That's not life-threatening at all. That's not hindering or damaging the animal or any concerns that we can put out there. Really comfortable. We fit this on just, I don't know how many, but I think in the total animals that we've captured for the data up to now, I think is over 70 individuals. For most of them, we've used this specific head harness collar, and it can, if the animal's life is not in danger. And yeah, it's been approved with I think we've done it in 8 different reserves and parks up to now. Yeah, so we feel confident in what we're doing and how we're doing it. Some of the collars we can also advise that is not working. So the one around the neck is not ideal. Then you'd ask yourself the question, why do you want to do this collaring? It's not nice to see a collar on a giraffe. Why do you want to do it? So if we can't gather data from certain individuals in healthy populations, how can we extrapolate the information and data on spatial distributions and home ranges and core areas to isolated populations, for instance, or threatened subspecies? So whatever data we collect needs to have an end goal. So we could have multiple ways of analyzing the data. I'm doing quite a bit of work on ArcGIS, where we do a hotspot analysis, and with certain models in the analyst toolbox, we can come up with core areas and areas they really highly favor and avoid, even though the habitat looks the same for the human. And based on that distributions, if this is a 2-year study and we get these core areas related to water sources or unrelated to water sources, it could be shelter, it could be dense areas for protection against predators. There's various things that we look at and variants that we include into the model.
Deel van die navorsing is om die kameelperd se verkose dieet te ondersoek.
So the first thing is, like as we know, when an animal eats on an acacia, then the thorn length will get bigger. But the giraffes have the adaptable tongue, which can go around the thorn, so that they can easily maneuver away from that as well.
So here's a Ziziphus mucronata. It's a highly preferred plant species of the giraffes as well. So we know that they feed on them. So we will just sample it and then we'll look at the quality as well. So we look at different chemical compositions like the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the calcium in the plants. And then what we can do as well, we can compare it to the dung samples to see if they're actually getting what they need from the plant.
Die studie is so omvattend dat selfs die grond onder.
Yeah, so eventually you've seen Jamie. Jamie was one of my students. Now she's my colleague. And we're looking at diet as one of the 20, 30 things that we've included into the bigger study. Eventually, if you look at this, if the collars are on the animals, we can make, like this is just a short Vimeo almost to show how the animals distribute themselves within a reserve or a park. And you could go back to each of those locations or points or the core areas, and you can go and sample the trees that are there, the soil samples that are there, the individuals on the diet. So for a 2-year period, you would do a diet study with actual physical observations. It's not just that you collar the animal and you leave the animal in the field. You get data. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but you can work out how many hectares do you need to sustain one giraffe. And I could do this for any national park or reserve in Africa, or for any matter, for any place in the world, where we quantify the biomass that's needed to sustain one giraffe. And then we can work out, like a carrying capacity that we do for livestock, to work out how much food do you need to sustain a population of giraffe. And in my opinion, and from my research, there's very little done on that to identify the minimum requirement to sustain individuals. We translocate animals left, right, and center to the private industry, or to different reserves or parks in Africa. But who has done the habitat studies? Who has zoomed in to look at the qualities that are there? And I mean, if you take one individual for 1 year and the data and the locations that you get from it, there's obviously areas that they favor and avoid. So my question still is, how do the animals know, how did the giraffe know? Where should they go and search for certain nutrients and minerals during different phases and during different seasons. And it could be a lactating female, or it could be an older individual, or it could be a young female or a bull. But how do they know where to go and search for this dietary requirements? And that's what my research is about, is the habitat and the resources. If you look at that picture at the right bottom, I mean, there's something in that tree that, I mean, if there's 7, 8 giraffes spending a half an hour feeding on it, why? Why don't they go and each search for their own tree, or 30 meters to the left or to the right, you'll get the same species, but why don't they spend that much time on the same tree? So obviously you need to get those samples, you need to analyze it. So I'll be collecting plant samples, I'll be collecting soil samples throughout the study period. I'll bring it back to the lab, to the electron microscope, and we'll do different sort of analysis in our nutrition lab. And then we start publishing, and we start getting information out there. But it takes time to share that scientific information and to implement that. And then you can go back to the reserve and you can say, well, these certain areas, if you maybe treat the bush encroached areas in some way and you get a certain quality back, or mineral or nutrient back, then you might increase the quality of that reserve. So there's a lot of management that comes with it. Eventually, we are facing the same issue again, that even the habitat, it's not just the animals that are going extinct, but the habitat as well. If you really want to read a good book, you need to read Song of the Dodo from David Quammen, where he explains island geobiography. And these little islands we're protecting in Africa are getting isolated, and it's getting smaller and smaller. And eventually, I don't know where we're going to end up. If we keep on with the same trend that we've done for the last 3-4 decades. The focus of the giraffe, it's a manipulated photo, so you'll never get a giraffe like that. But the research focus needs to be very clear and very specific. If I want to study a giraffe within this is one of the nature reserves, to identify core areas and the areas they prefer, if we could expand or buy more property, or expand the areas they really favor and decrease the areas they avoid, it should add a little more to the sustainability of that area. The specific trees, we could, for the collars, they would identify specific trees the animals would go to on a frequent basis, and we would go to these trees and we would go and sample that, and you could build some sort of pattern that tells you a story. Why would they favor and avoid areas? You could take older individuals compared to younger individuals. Why would an old female, like on the left, have a limited spatial area within 1 year? But if you take this individual on the right-hand side, she roamed much bigger areas. So then you start to include other sort of variables and hormones that the last couple of years we've done various projects with hormones. Prof. Andre Ganswind is involved with that, and one of my master students, Siska Skagen, who's from the Netherlands, she did enormous great work and studies, and is only starting to publish her work now on the hormones and the distributions and differences between males and females. Eventually, with South Africa being in a situation where we face the fact that animals have been constrained into smaller environments, they've been fenced off, all our national parks for that matter, and the animals are constrained to one extent or the other, have two specific questions. Is if you want to stock a newly developing reserve or a national park or a game farm, they always want to know what type of animal will be suitable for that area and how many of those animals can I keep. And my lecturing and teaching and training at the university is specifically that. How do we know what's the type of animal that is suitable to a certain habitat? And how do we know how much biomass, how much dry matter, how much food is available to sustain these animals? So this is what we've perfected over many, many years. We've got involved with projects with the bears. Absolutely amazing that we had the experience to be working with the De Beers personnel, and to be privileged to be doing some studies that no one else has done before. So if we look at the project we did at Rooipoort Nature Reserve, I don't want to stick too much time on the science part of it, but eventually You need to map each reserve. You need to identify vegetation areas. So you get grassland scientists or rangeland scientists involved, botanists, and you do a detailed mapping, and then you get a team of expertise. So this is the bigger team, almost 30 members from 10, 12 different countries that was part of this project in Rooipoort Nature Reserve, each one bringing his own skills to the table. And then, we start working together as a team, and we start collecting data. So the moment an individual is on the ground, you'll see a few more videos later on that I want to share how we actually catch the giraffe. But the moment the animal is on the ground, each one start collecting his samples and start collecting the data. Trenton is from the USA. Jason is from Canada. There's from the Netherlands, there's from Australia, there's from Austria, there's people from all over the country, from all over the world that join into the expedition. And it's eventually keeping the animals' well-being always number one, keeping the animals safe. So we've got monitors to monitor the heartbeat, the blood pressure, the breathing. And in this team, specific in this team, was 7 veterinarians that was with us at that specific occasion. I think if I just look at the pictures, I can't help to smile of the adventures we've had. Tiffany and Sean from Texas, Ilse Litter, who's perfected the technique of collecting sperm samples. I'll share a bit later on that. And then all sorts of biological and physiological measurements that we put into a database. So it's not just the coloring that you get and the spatial distributions and the home ranges that you get from the animals, but suddenly you build a database of over 70 giraffe, and there you could see on the top left hand side, you see the different countries and representatives from people from all over, and it makes it nice. The adventures and the fun we've had is almost speaking more than just the work and the science we're doing. It tells you what we're doing is making a global impact. And it's nice to be sharing this with my students and my friends and my colleagues to say that we're doing all this work, but eventually it ends up in policies and ordinations and go up to government level on making decisions and on a global scale. We're trying to make a real difference with the research. The data we're collecting, this is just the accelerometer. Some of you might be familiar with it. So we've tested this in a zoo, in a Berlin Zoo. Florian Six, who's the curator there at the Berlin Zoo, they tested some of the collars for us there, and we try and replicate and simulate some of the information we get on the database with the real-time data on wild giraffe as well. You get data on areas they prefer and avoid. I don't want to stand too much still on that. Vegetation types they prefer, distribution between males and females that differ. This might be interesting. So in an entire reserve, this is Rooipoort Nature Reserve, is 44,000 hectares in size, but the males utilize 63% of the reserve and the females only 39%. Okay, then you zoom in a little more. You want to understand how the distributions and the network works, and you want to identify key resource areas. So if you can identify key resource areas, then we can understand what the animals are seeking and how that changes over the seasons. The phenology, how the cycle of the trees change. Then we go back to the vegetation types and we start sampling in these core areas. And if you start looking into the 44,000 hectares and you break it down, then you see a core area is only 28 hectares that they really favor. And then you ask yourself, why? Why don't we have the entire area representing 28 hectares and there's 44,000 hectares that the animals don't properly utilize? So, I mean, we could play with maps and GIS, so I'll publish, or this has been published, so I'll get to that a bit later on. But the real work actually starts after the coloring, where we go and start to collect soil samples. The nutrient collection goes back to the nutrient lab at the university. The phenology, we note the entire 2-year period to see when the plants are flowering, when they have seed pods. And then we have a specific technique that Prof. Nico Smith developed, is to quantify the biomass on different height levels. So we can see if a youngster is only a certain year, a certain age old, to what extent is certain nutrients and minerals available up to a certain height, and the males and females and the differences on competition, and also with other herbivores. So it makes it interesting when you zoom back to that specific tree, you suddenly realize that there are certain qualities built into that tree that gives us answers, even though we don't know all the answers yet, but it opens a door of new questions. And then you'll get a specialist to start working on that specifically. On the South African subspecies, we've done a few things, technical reports, and you can go and see online as well, the IUCN, the technical report for the continent-wide giraffe distributions. I'm primarily responsible, me and some of my other colleagues on the specialist group, also involved, that we had to come up with a plan and the status for the South African giraffe. This you can see on the EWT and yeah, some of the other websites as well that's available online. And then obviously I'm involved with the other subspecies as well, part of the specialist group also to give advice and information on technical reports for the IUCN. So it's not just the South African situation. We have a unique situation because the South African giraffe numbers doubled in the last 2-3 decades because of the game industry and people owning giraffe, where in Africa it's not the same case. The numbers almost, I want to say, halved in the same period. We do genetic studies. This has been published. One of our students at the genetics lab with Prof. Paul Grobler, who's my colleague, published a very nice paper on the inbreeding and the percentage of specific individuals. All this you can find online if you're interested in specifically that. But I want to quickly show you a quick video how I involve maybe my students and some of my international colleagues. We did a very, very nice study where we used drones to understand the animals' locomotion and how they move and how they run. So let's quickly look at that.
On the spatial ecology of the giraffe, the areas they prefer, the areas they avoid, distances they walk, certain tree species they favor, and all of that contributes to our knowledge to manage these animals a little better.
So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to work out how their anatomy actually influences the way they get around the world. And we've come out here, this wonderful place to actually study these giraffes and to get some footage of them running to see how we can unwrap some of these mysteries. At the same time, raise awareness for these animals, which are quite vulnerable. We're using our drones, first of all, to capture video footage, but we're also using some new technology on the drones to actually make a map of the terrain that they're running on. So a 3D map that actually gives us the elevation and it gives us the texture, so we can work out, is it rocky ground? Are there lots of bushes? What's the vegetation like? And we can use that to work out some information from the actual video footage. And it's also useful to other people like ecologists to work out what the actual ground type is and how that interacts with the way that the giraffes move. So it's very exciting to use this new technology.
Yeah, that study, even though it was a lot of fun doing it over a couple of years, we managed to publish it. And it's very valuable information that we use modern technology to gain knowledge and to understand the animals better. So there's multiple projects coming that if I can quickly share some couple of photos on what we're currently busy with, and it's also in the pipeline, is what we're doing if animals are being culled, for instance, or animals that died in a zoo. We would, for instance, try and get access to the dead carcass. And then we would do dissections. We would inject latex, for instance, in the artery or the blood system. And we would take it for a CT scanner, like where this was at a local hospital, where any human would go to. And it's the goodwill of people that is helping us to do research. And then you get information that just never was previously available. So even if you do these 3D scans and you make models, this is a real individual where we got information we never previously had access to. If you look at the two videos that I just, it's 15-20 seconds that I quickly made, just to see if you zoom in, you could zoom into a specific particular area, and you can try and solve some unanswered questions. So the blood pressure is a big thing that we don't know. How the animals regulate a sudden increase in blood when you chase them with a helicopter, or when you dart the animals. The body temperature, the increase of the body temperature, but the inner ear or the brain temperature that stays constant. All these things we're busy investigating now, and soon we will hopefully publish that. So even though I was trained as a rangeland scientist and a zoologist, now I'm involved with things I've never ever thought would be possible. If you look there at the top right, specifically there's a few things on the latex that we pick up on a CT scanner that is unfamiliar with some larger herbivores. Then afterwards we would dissect the animals. My big friend and colleague, Dr. Willem Daffy, and Marna van der Walt is working with us on this project. Marna is driving the study at the moment to investigate specifically, do we find certain irregularities amongst giraffe, the heart shape, the ventricles. I've got a colleague at pathology, histopathology, that's helping us to analyze that. And there's so many questions we just don't know. But if we dissect it, and each time we're getting closer to the answer. Like I said, we're doing a bit of thermoregulation as well, where we've trained some giraffe. There you can see the humans added to the video, where we've trained individuals close by my university, where Rudy Virtue is a good friend of mine, is helping us to understand and study these animals to get a bit more understanding on thermoregulation and how they regulate that. So now after animal has died for some or the other reason, and we can dissect the animal, we start looking at specific things that just never happened in the past. So it's involving scientists and specialists. I'm not the specialist on any of these things. I get people that are involved to come and investigate that. And that's an opportunity for anyone that's looking at these videos or presentation to get involved to some way or the other, is to be part of it. I mean, there you could see a screenshot of the drone and the giraffe. If you really spend a bit of time with the giraffe, it's not to scare them off or anything. You can really habituate and train these animals to be part of the science and the experiments. So we didn't harm any individuals by doing that. We're taking X-rays of the different hooves to see what does a healthy hoof look like, and how can you compare that with, I know hoof problems in zoos and animals in captivity is an enormous problem. So we've started to build a database on healthy hooves and different hooves on different terrains and in different areas in the country to come up with some answers eventually. So we were fortunate to be part of a 50-50 series. And yes, again, I just want to show you the appreciation that my students, that goes with to the field and being exposed to research. And I want you to experience it from what they see and how they experience the field work.
Intussen word die mismonsters by die mobiele laboratorium ontleed.
Maak jy parasiet eiertjies na bo dryf. Dan gaan ons dit in daai goedjies gooi en dan gaan ons die boonste laag afhaal waar al die eiertjies dan in behoort te wees. Dit sit ons dan op 'n slide wat ons dan onder die mikroskoop kyk.
Okay, en hoeveel eiertjies kry mens uit so een bolletjie?
Okay, as 'n mens nou op die slide kyk, is daar nie soos mense kry 1, 2, ek het al maksimum 7 gekry. En dan sit jy hom in 'n formule wat dan vir jou in totaal in die dier se lyf sal gee.
Die hoeveelheid parasieteiertjies in die kameelperd se mis gee wetenskaplikes 'n aanduiding van die dier se gesondheid. En dis nie die enigste geheime wat in die kameelperd se mis versteek word nie. Die volgende stap is dus om dit vir DNS-ontleding na die Universiteit van die Vrystaat weg te stuur.
Dis is so jy het net die mis wat ons versamel het, so wat maak jy dan?
So ons gebruik nou slegs die buitenste laag soos wat Babalo nou vir ons hier demonstreer. Die rede vir dit is die mis skuur teen die darmkanaal van die dier en so word die dier se DNA kan ek maar sê aan dit vasgepak. Ons wil graag kyk na die inteling vlak en mutasies is ook om jou variasies tussen populasies te kan kry.
François Deacon se missie is nie net om pogings vir die kameelperd se bewaring aan te dryf nie, maar ook om sy geesdrif vir kameelperde aan sy studente oor te dra.
We cannot protect the animals if we don't protect the habitat. So the primary step is to protect the habitat, then we can protect the animal because they will be living in a conducive and reproductive biodiversity.
We need to experience them, we need to because you find that other species, because they're extinct, we just read about them, and for me that's not enough.
Intussen word die mismonsters by die mobiele laboratorium ontleed.
Maak hy parasiet eiertjies na bo dryf.
So a piece in a puzzle. Each student is a piece in a puzzle. Each colleague is a piece in a puzzle. Each project, each attempt to try and understand or address a research question or problem statement is a piece in a puzzle. At the moment, like I said right at the beginning, we have more questions than answers. But it'll be my goal for the next 20, 30 years to try and solve this puzzle and come up with something plausible, something usable, something digestible for the human mind, what we can do different. I'm nearing the end to say that I've been privileged to be in this position to share this information with you. I've been privileged to be sharing my ideas and my experiments with international colleagues and people that are working with me. It's an honor to be working with specialists in the team. I mean, if you take what Ilse Litter has accomplished to capture wild giraffe for the first time, to collect sperm samples for the first time, it's an amazing achievement, because now we can take those sperm samples and we could artificially inseminate any female anywhere in the world. And we've perfected that. And Ilse, I mean, has been spearheaded that specifically for so many years on other individuals and other wildlife species, but this would be the first time we've done it for wild giraffe. So now we can implement that into the bigger picture for Africa, and we can try and collect sperm samples on the continent in isolated populations. And then to finish,
There's not a lot known about giraffe. A lot of questions to answer.
We need knowledge to eventually turn this thing around, if we can.
if we collar all the individuals, it is possible.
These collars could provide the science necessary to save giraffes.
This project is, in the end, really going to assist nature conservation.
Watch.
They die easily.
Hold on. Get in.
Each member in the team has got a specific task.
You've got such a limited time to gather data.
The big thing is to collect some samples.
So if you want to see Catching Giants, you'll probably have to first attend some of the film festivals, but it's won multiple awards. at various of the film festivals. And again, it's actually Scott Davison, a good friend of mine, that has dedicated a lot of his time and effort and money to try and tell the story. So I'm humbled to say, and I'm in a fortunate and in a position to feel that I'm lucky to be sharing this information with you. And if there's anything in the future where anyone would want to get involved with, I mean, there's the video link if you want to go and watch it again or share it with anyone. Don't hesitate to communicate with me or the university. The idea for this talk is really to get more scientists and more people involved in what we're doing and how we're doing it, than trying to create more complications and hiccups. The problem is what we're facing in giraffe circles and in giraffe conservation is that there's no unity. And it's a big concern because in the end, the animals are suffering from it. So I always end any sort of talk with the words by a donkey, because in Afrikaans, my mother tongue, it's by a donkey. And then most international people would remember when they want to speak a little Afrikaans, they just say by the donkey. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And if there's any questions or anyone that want to ask me something, I think now we're going to have a session, a question and answer session. I'll be glad to try and share what I think I hope I can. But thanks for this opportunity, and I really appreciate that I've been fortunate to be in this position. Thank you, guys.
So I just wanted to, I was very interested that you said that the numbers in South Africa have doubled compared to other African countries. And I mean, is that a promising sign for South Africa, or is there actually a problem with those numbers? I mean, because you need to get numbers of species at some sort of equilibrium as well. So I was just kind of interested in that. And then, I mean, I think from the talk, it's almost suggesting that giraffe are almost like an indicator species of the condition of the environment where they're living. I don't know if that's a true statement, you know, the old canary in the mine sort of situation. If are giraffe like that? And then the last thing, you were saying that, you know, we've been told that giraffe going extinct, but what exactly is happening? Are they literally dropping dead and starving because habitat isn't suitable, or because there's habitat problems, are they like unable to breed? Or, I mean, because I don't know, I've never seen like mass giraffe just dying everywhere. I'm just interested how that works. I mean, you did say that South Africa isn't seeing a giraffe problem per se. But yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Marty. I hope you can hear me. I don't see that I'm on the screen, but if you can hear me, then it's fine. Yeah, you've got three very good questions. So the first one for the African situation and the South Africans almost making a success story of it, that if you think about the ownership that we've got in South Africa is absolutely unique to the rest of the world, where you can own any sort of wildlife species. It could be a giraffe or a rhino or a sable or kudu, and you can determine what's going to become of that animal. And eventually there's a big industry that evolved with the game industry, that if you can sell the offspring, or you sell the old bulls, or there's a hunting or a culling or an auction or anything that comes with it, you can make profit from it. And that profit goes normally back to either the logistical side on the management side, or it goes back to conservation or other efforts or research. So what we're doing in South Africa, we've got more wildlife species, not more wildlife species, we've got more head of wildlife species than we've ever had before because of the game industry. And literally from the 1999 IUCN statements, when we did that survey, the continent-wide survey, up to the latest one, the South African giraffe doubled literally in its numbers because of this game industry. And by that, I mean more game farms, more reserves, more national parks got involved with that. And the distribution of the giraffes, same as for what we've did with the rhinos, we've increased the numbers just purely because of ownership and the protection that we add to it. There's a lot of complicalities that comes with it when you start constraining animals into smaller environments. So the reality is few farmers and a few park managers realize that we need to quantify the resource. We need to work out what's the amount of food and biomass that's available to sustain the animals when you constrain them. And it's not a one shoe that fits for all. It's not something that you can implement in East Africa and say we're going to fence the animals and put them in smaller reserves or parks. It's just not going to work. But in the Southern African situation, and when I say Southern, it includes Namibia and some parts of Botswana, it definitely is a plausible way of taking care of the animals, adding to their shelter and to their needs, and monitoring that. It's not that you put animals within a fenced area and you just keep them and let them be. So I do think I've been to 3 international giraffe conferences since 2011. And on all 3 of those, and I think Andy and some of the other colleagues that has also been to those conferences can say that what we're doing in South Africa is unique and it's working. And that's why we can experiment a bit on the giraffe to some extent, because our giraffe and the subspecies I'm working on is not endangered. It's not in danger at all. So I can afford to experiment on these animals and perfect some of the techniques in what we're doing. And then we can implement that into the isolated populations. If you take the Peraltas in West Africa, where there's less than 250 left, I mean, I can't go and experiment on them, but if I've perfected a technique, how we capture them or tranquilize them or transport them, or fit a collar or collect sperm samples from a South African population, and I take the same team to go and do it there, we limit a lot of the risk that's involved. If you can ask, there's 2 or 3 veterinarians also joining into the conversation. It's really a difficult animal to be working with. There's so many complicalities and risks that you get with it. And all 70 the giraffe, we've got a 100% success rate to say that we haven't harmed any individual, we haven't injured any animal, not even to speak of animals being killed or died during any sort of experiment. So, and that gives us a bit of confidence because we're not experimenting anymore. We're really talking confidently in what we're doing and how we're doing it. So for your third question, the giraffe situation as it is at the moment, it's like you say, it's not that you see that giraffe is dying anyway. But as soon as you start working with the different countries, there's I think only 9 or so countries left that still have giraffe. And with the latest censuses and working with the park managers and the rangers, and we started to collect data on the numbers. If you take the reticulated giraffe in East Africa, in Tanzania and Kenya, from 1999 up to the 2016 report, that's less than 2 decades. The number we had in 1999 and what it's now is 80% less. So then you could ask questions. I mean, is it only for giraffe? Is it other wildlife species? Like I said in the BBC documentary, there's only 4% of wildlife species still left. The rest is livestock and it's cattle, and the rest is made up by humans. So once upon a time, we didn't have these livestock and we didn't have these humans, and it was 100% wildlife. Where are the 96%? What's happened to them? And it's the same story with other wildlife than we have for the giraffe. It's nothing different. But we started noticing it and we're starting to realize that, well, something is going on, and there's very few people that are really interested in trying to understand why the numbers are plummeting. East Africa, Central Africa, bushmeat is a big thing, and poaching and that. But in South Africa, that's not really an issue. I would say the biggest concern and the major issue is losing natural habitat. You can't replace a tree that the animals are surviving on in your lifetime. It's not like when you have buffaloes and you can planted pastures under a pivot, and within weeks you've got food for them, or lucerne or anything like that. A tree is a super valuable resource that's unreplaceable in our lifetime, and that we can't keep up with. The charcoal that the people are harvesting in East Africa, the trees and the habitat destruction, You absolutely have to at some stage have to listen to a talk presented by Dr. Willem Dafoe on the end of Africa's game, where he really shows you examples where species have become extinct because of the human encroachment into their natural habitat. You can go now. I encourage any of you, and I tell this to the students, any of you can go now on Google and go and check an image on a satellite image of Lesotho from above. Lesotho is a desert, and it's 100 kilometers from me. And it's a natural environment that has been distracted to such an extent, Lesotho will never ever recover. There's no way Lesotho will recover. They've lost their topsoil, they've lost their seedbed, they've lost all their natural species. And it's an example. If you go Google the fence line between the Kruger National Park and the Malalaan neighboring villages, I mean, it speaks for itself. You can just see the human impact. And I see it. And I want to bring that sort of awareness to the rest of the world that I don't know if we're going to save these animals eventually. It's not that they are dying left, right, and center in front of us. But 20 years down the line, when my kids need to go and see how it looks at Mana pools, I don't know if they're going to see giraffe there. And that's how quick it happens. So I don't know if I answered your question, Marty, but I hope it was an elaborative answer.
Wow. Francois, I mean, this was an incredible presentation, and I really feel your passion. And I have put in the chat already a question which you might have seen or not. Recently in February, I attended another webinar of a foundation which says they're also protecting giraffe. And this seemed to be very big and mobilizing a lot of Facebook groups which were joining and collecting money. And there were zoos, and seemed to be a real kind of big movement. And it appeared to be kind of fundraising big style. Now, you mentioned that there's kind of controversy in the giraffe protection community, and Alison also kind of warned me with some links on where to look more closely for this particular group or foundation or whatever. Now, I just wanted to know, is this just a controversy, as you have them a lot in conservation, like the hunting controversy or the role of zoos, or I mean, different schools of thought about how best to do conservation? Or is this really kind of just exploiting the love for the animal for some very sinister motives? I mean, what is your experience or judgment, or why do you say that the community is kind of not united and possibly cannot be united, or is it just to sort something out in a healthy controversy, just to get a feel for it?
Thank you, Sibylle. I was so hoping no one would ask me a question on what's going on in the giraffe circles. It's really complicated, and I can honestly say the biggest issue is because of funding. If I start searching, to give you an example, if any of my master's or PhD students or colleagues are searching for possible funds to support their research, it could be anything, genetics or disease or anything what we're trying to study, then wherever we go, people would say they've already given funds and they've already supported someone. And if you really go and look into the issue of it, there's a very, very dominant organization. I can't name it because it's going to create chaos. But if you've attended some of it and you've also referred to it looks like a fundraising situation, and absolutely 100% that's the issue. We don't see funding coming to conservation. We don't see funding coming towards research, supporting native people from Africa doing work. It's internationals that collect money, that get big donors. And the issue is that we don't see that coming to conservation. And that's where the issue is. As soon as we start raising it, there's no accountability in what's being done. It's untraceable in what they're doing. A lot of the work they're doing is unethical, and that's what the debate is about. So the links and I think the information Alison shared, you're welcome. I mean, if you go Google now, what went wrong, some of them have been blacklisted in some of the national parks, never to go back there again. So there's a lot of irregularities that goes inside the giraffe circles that goes around. I've really, and you can ask any of my colleagues, the last 2-3 years, I've distanced myself completely from the politics and the nonsense and even the specialist group and the IUCN, and I distance myself from it and I focus on what I can do. I focus on my students, I focus on my research and the work I'm doing. And I've always said that if there's not fun in what you're doing, then don't do it. And my research is fun. And I like to keep it that way. I like to involve people that want to have fun and join in the expedition. We have plenty of laughs and there's lots of fun. And we're getting tired and we get dirty and we get injured ourselves, just not the animals. And that I can promise you, not one single giraffe has been injured in any of our expeditions. And in that sense, I want to leave it at that. I don't want to elaborate too much on the politics that's going around. But if you follow the news and the articles and what's going to soon circle, I think there's a big bomb going to explode. Money that has been allocated for a lot of things, but never reached the destination.
Francois, great talk, fantastic. I started following you after I saw your documentary. I think Walking with Giants was the one, so it's phenomenal. How can non-research people join an expedition or come and see your work, or get to see what happens on the ground? Because I'm South African but now live in the States, and there's just a lot of interest of people that especially your group of donors, let's just say, that would actually fund local organizations versus other international organizations. Do you offer anything? Have you thought about offering anything? And whether it's more organized or me as a local coming and seeing what you do, like, versus having something more organized. Have you thought of anything? Do you do anything like that? Because I would just love to see what you do in action. I think that would be so fascinating.
Thanks, Justine. It's exactly that, and that's why we want to engage with the public and share the stories behind the scenes. I mean, obviously there's a science part to it, and it's nerve-wracking, and there's a lot of planning that goes into any expedition. But back to your question is, if I keep contact with yourself or anyone that want to be part of it, I mean, it's as simple as I put you on the list and I say, in 3 weeks or in 3 months or 6 months time, we have another capturing and we need to translocate individuals, or we need to, it's as simple as that. I invite you, and if you just get to South Africa, I will host you. I will give you food and I'll pitch your tent for you. My two brothers are my left and right hand in the field. The one is a lawyer and the one is a medical doctor. But I mean, I can't go and do field work without them. And it makes it fun because I invite everyone, and suddenly you find yourself with people that I had, like Maddie, when we did the kudu spit thing. She was from Canada and she wanted to take a gap year, and she started reading and she said, well, can she join in? And I said, absolutely. We start in a week's time. When we stopped at the reserve, there was a vehicle behind us, and she just managed to arrange flights and everything, and she joined in the expedition. And that's how it is. It's not a closed or only scientist type of thing. The idea really is to make the public involved and join in the expedition, and you take the stories back and share it with others. If you look on the participants, there's a few guys on the list that can say the same. I mean, Jason from Canada, he can share the same story. It was like, Jason, I mean, 3 weeks from now, we're going to put a few collars on individuals. Do you want to join us? Yeah, why not? And he's jumping in a plane and he comes and joins us. So there's nothing formal to it, but you really have to come and enjoy it with us and experience it with us. I promise you, you're probably going to move back to Africa once you've experienced something like that.
No, that's fantastic. And yeah, as I said, like, I was just so impressed. That documentary was amazing. Because you never think about like how such a huge animal gets captured until you realize that there's massive logistical issues. So it was impressive to see. So
Thank you. Luckily, I just organize the team, but the guy who's mostly responsible to keep the animal alive is the picture just above you. It's Hasty the bear, but it's actually Willem Dafoe. He needs to keep the animals alive. So we've got a little secret code to how we talk when there's an animal that we need to monitor more closely. But I mean, if there's any specialist amongst you guys who want to share and come and join in or add something, I mean, when the animal is on the ground and we collect samples and there's something else that we didn't think of, please share the ideas with us so that we can maybe include that into the database.
Great. And how can we get a hold of you? I mean, is through Facebook or LinkedIn? Do you have like a preference?
Yeah, I'm not big on social media, unfortunately, but I think Ruan will definitely share at least my contact details and my email and like the basics. And I really, there would be no more fun for me or a bigger privilege than if I can convince any of you to come and join in the next expedition. So I hope you will be first, Justine, and yeah, and then we just make it work. There's always opportunities to join in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
David from Central Europe asks, I'd like to ask, isn't it better to have protected areas that are heterogeneous than areas that support only little number of animals?
No, I think the key is to have a diverse habitat. The more qualities you can include, and I'm definitely not a team player to fence any animal or to constrain any wildlife species. I mean, I wish we had these big migration routes and anything, but the situation we're facing in South Africa, people are moving giraffe or rhinos to a 400-hectare reserve or a camp or a private game farm. And they don't know if the animals will adapt or be surviving there. So we need to determine the habitat suitability. We've developed a habitat suitability index so that we can determine what's the minimum requirements to keep that rhino or that giraffe alive. What's the minimum size, like we determined in the Kalahari. You need 126 hectares to sustain one giraffe for a year. Anything less than that, you put the animal under nutritional stress. And then they start overutilizing your key resource areas. It's usually your protected species that they favor. And before you know it, you've done more damage to the habitat that cannot recover eventually, and you've done more harm than good by putting an animal into an environment they're not supposed to be surviving in. So I'm a big fan of the larger, the bigger, the better. It makes it easier for management because the animals can survive better. They're less exposed to diseases and parasites and all kinds of things. The moment you bring animals into smaller environments, you start finding issues with the health and parasites, medical issues, diseases that suddenly kicks in, and we don't have the slightest idea what to be doing with this at the moment. And 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line, I'm sure we're going to actually lose a couple of wildlife species just because of that, because we've inbred them. We don't know the genetics. We don't know what they were supposed to be doing. Animals that was free roaming, disease and parasite resistant, we start putting in smaller camps. We don't know the habitat, and suddenly we face issues that we don't know how to deal with.
I just had a question about how invasive species like Prosopis in the Northern Cape and how the bush encroachment affects the giraffe populations here. Does it not really affect them? Is it bad? I mean, it's obviously not a good thing, but how badly does it affect them?
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, great question. I mean, alien and invasive species is taking a lot of our work to advise game farms and reserves and farmers to remove them. Some of them are, you probably, I don't know, Erin, if you're South African, but they've been listed as a species that need to be removed and eradicated as quick as possible. Even though the areas where you do still find them, the giraffe feed on them and there's no harm done. but the seed pods distribute very easily and they can very quickly densify. But there's good products on the market where you can specifically eradicate with arboricides the prosopis. And there's big areas where I know the government and the Northern Cape agriculture is assisting farmers and reserves to clean up these areas. But it's not just for the Northern Cape. I mean, you can take any province in our country and you can talk about an alien or invasive species. And that's part of the training with the students as well at the Rangeland Science Department, is to teach them the difference between an alien plant and an invasive plant and a problematic plant, and what to be doing with these plants. So we don't want these plants, we don't need these plants. So the quicker we can get rid of them, the better.
Thank you very much.
See, there's a question here, Rowan, from, I'm going to say this name wrong, Perian Gebramedin. I wonder if Dr. Deacon has information on the status of the giraffe species in East Africa, other than Kenya and Tanzania, for example, Ethiopia.
Yeah, so if you go onto the IUCN, the website, you will get the status report that we did in 2016, and all countries that still have giraffe left has been included into that report. So that's the most recent information that will be available. We'll probably repeat a continent-wide census soon to come up with more reliable figures and numbers. But yeah, don't believe everything that you're reading on the species and subspecies, and there's only 4 species and this or that. That's part of the big debate that I don't want to get involved in. But go to that IUCN report. It's accurate. It's been compiled, I think, with we were 22 scientists that each had a section to contribute, and I think the 2016 technical report on the giraffe status in Africa, that will go through as the #1 information to be shared. Don't go onto websites and public or social media stuff. You will get confused.